Слава Ісусу Христу. Good morning for everybody who is in the United States of America. Dear friends, I sincerely congratulate all the participants of the round table, Just Peace for Ukraine, Threats and Challenges. And let us start with a prayer of our Father. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Please take a seat. Dear friends, this event takes place within the framework of the project Principles of a Just War and Just Peace in the context of Russian aggression in Ukraine, which is carried out jointly and with the support of the University of Notre Dame. From the UCU, or as we call UKU side, 4 people participate particularly in this project because of we are running 9 common project. In reality, from the Notre Dame side, the lead investigator is Daniel Philpott, professor of political science. We are sincerely grateful to our partners at Notre Dame, particularly Dr. Geraldine Meehan, who is here with us online, for the financial support of research on this topic and for solidarity with Ukraine at this difficult time. As a country experiencing unprecedented aggression since the Second World War, we, according to the teaching of the Church, have the right to national self-defense in response to non-provocative aggression. We are also profoundly aware that the aim of this national self-defense, which is technically called just war, is just peace. The only aim of just war is just peace. The war Russia started changed everything. The start of active aggressions after February 24 of the last year caused mass displacement of the citizens of Ukraine. People left their homes in search for safety and protection. The number of officially registered internally displaced persons in the country reaches 4.9 million. At the beginning of December 2022, it became known that since the beginning of the full-scale war with the Russian Federation, more than 14.5 million citizens have already left Ukraine, of which at least 11.7 million people to the countries of the European Union. According to the analysis conducted by the University of St. Louis, the destruction from the Russian invasion of Ukraine is terrible. It's estimated 138 billion direct damage of the infrastructure. Among them, 3,127 educational institutions, 1,245 healthcare facilities, 200,000 private cars, 14,000 public transportation, almost 500 religious buildings damaged or destroyed. And this is only what we can count and estimate. What does just peace for Ukraine mean in this situation? To clarify this question, I am honored to invite a well-known expert in this field, professor of political science of the University of Notre Dame, Daniel Philpott, to speak. Professor Philpott is well known in the United States, but this area he works in is new for Ukraine. Therefore, the professor, being the author of many books on this topic and having practical experience in solving the problems that interest us, will answer, I hope, the questions that concerns us in this report. Today, Professor Philpott will be giving a talk on the topic Just and Unjust Peace in Ukraine and Russia. Professor Philpott, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I cannot begin to say what an honor it is to speak with you at the Ukrainian Catholic University. I consider it a work of providence that I have had the opportunity to work with Father Yuri Shurko in securing a grant from my university's initiative on collaboration with UKU in order to consider the justice of the present war and to think together about what a just peace looks like. I am encouraged that the University of Notre Dame has made this commitment in solidarity. I am grateful for the work of the Nanovic Institute at Notre Dame in supporting it so clearly. The Office of International Studies that has supported it so centrally. I visited your fine university in spring 2007 with my wife, Diana, when we were hosted by Dr. Jeffrey Wills. I was so inspired by this endeavor to resurrect a university after so many years under communism. I am honored also to be among friends and colleagues whom I respect and admire. I have greatly admired Archbishop Boris Gudziak for several years and was delighted that he spoke at Notre Dame's graduation this past May, especially that he tossed a football into the audience. I am pleased to see as a speaker my old friend Heinz Gerhard Justenhoven, whose work for Catholic peace over so many years has been so important. And also in this conference, the journalist Anatoly Babinsky, whose pieces in The Pillar have helped me so greatly. Dr. Finno, it is an honor to be with you and to collaborate with you on this grant. I want to honor Father Rector Bodan, my friend Taras Dabko, Miroslav Mirinovich, and many others. So I address my talk to you and all of the distinguished guests here. The topic of the justice of war and the justice of peace could not be more important. For you, the question is not abstract. It is posed while you are defending your country in a terrible war that has taken the lives of tens of thousands of loved ones, creating a refugee and humanitarian crisis, has destroyed buildings and cities, and has caused regular power outages. I hope that in thinking about this question with you, I might in some way show solidarity and friendship with you in your struggle. We also share solidarity as Catholics, both of our own universities being affiliated with the global Catholic Church. It is from this standpoint that we consider the question of justice, which is the most important virtue for political life and for war. It is primarily the Roman Catholic Church that is associated with what is known as the just war ethic, which originates in the thought of Saints Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, and is one of the Church's greatest influences on civilization, laying the foundations for international law. As I will argue, though, the just war ethic needs to be expanded to think about the ethics of a just peace, which Ukraine begins to think about as it formulates its war aims. Here is where I believe Eastern Christianity's tradition of thought can help us with this emphasis on mercy, transformation or divinization, resurrection, or what I call the rebuilding of right relationships. How then do we begin to think about the justice of war? The most central tenet of the just war ethic is just cause. And what is a just cause for war? We would well be justified to think first of what most dominates our field of sight in this war, in any war, the lives lost. Some 120,000 Ukrainians have been killed and wounded, and some 200,000 Russians, although the numbers are disputed. These deaths and other forms of destruction are tragic and criminal. But they alone cannot account for the injustice of the attack or the just cause of war. If that were so, Ukraine may have been obliged to sue for peace. Had Ukraine been willing to accept the Russian invasion of February 2022, it could have saved these thousands of lives. Yet Ukrainians decided that something was at stake that was worth fighting for. This decision is at the heart of the justice of war. Something is worth fighting for. In the early 5th century, St. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, considered the question of whether killing in war could be compatible with Christian love. He concluded that it could be. The proper end of war must be justice, and it must be a just peace. Christians could adopt lethal force in order to repel an attack on a human good, on something worth fighting for. They must fight not solely for the purpose of victory or for the purpose of punishment, but rather for the just peace of the political order that would result. The Catholic Church has adopted Augustine's answer to this question and made it the basis for its teaching on war. But what is the good that a country justly defends? What is it that they rightly judge worth fighting for? I propose that it is the common good. The common good of the people of Ukraine is what Ukrainians justly fight for, and what President Putin has attacked and even denies exist. The concept of the common good is at the center of the social thought of the Catholic Church, and also one of the Church's important contributions to political life and thought in general. The concept is based on the natural law, and so can be known by anyone through reason. The Catholic Church defines the common good as the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more easily and more fully. In one sense, the common good is instrumental to the good of people in groups. The traffic system, parks, schools, the electric grid, the army, the police, and scores of other functions of government help people in groups to achieve their good. In another sense, though, the common good is constitutive of the good of people in a political order. What I mean by this is that the relationships between these people in which they cooperate to bring about political ends are themselves a good in their lives. In a political order, citizens vote, debate, judge, legislate, attend community meetings, and cooperate in scores of activities that the government administers. This cooperation is a good in itself. Call it civic friendship, and it is an intrinsic good, a form of the human good of interpersonal harmony. The members of political orders collaborate far more closely, intensively, and densely for their common good than they do with outsiders. In doing so, they form a particular instantiation of the political common good, civic friendships with one another, in a community that persists through time. Quite often, they share a language with other members of this community, along with a common history, and they express, celebrate, and form their community ever more deeply through songs, stories, literature, folklore, and shared stories about their history. When they combine these qualities with the desire for governance, they become a nation. There is something subjective, or perhaps better put, intersubjective about nations. People tell us what nation they are a part of through their own identification, their songs, their stories, their history. But this does not lessen the sense that nations express a form of human community that contains a network of civic friendships that are themselves an intrinsic good. Pope St. John Paul II discussed the good of nationhood in his final book, Memory and Identity, where he reflected much on his native Poland, a nation thick with song, story, and commitment, whose territorial state was conquered and divided between 1795 and 1918, was again conquered by the Soviets after World War II, and regained its independence in 1989. John Paul II wrote of the virtue of patria, a word whose root means father, as a natural good realized in community. To assert the virtue of patriotism is not to deny that the members of a nation have obligations to outsiders, or that there are boundaries to this virtue, both of which are rooted in the natural law. It is the natural law that helps us distinguish between virtuous patriotism and unjust nationalism. It is rather to assert that the members of a nation that is a political community have obligations of governance to one another that they do not have towards outsiders. Over the course of history, people have realized this political common good through finite and particular governments. Today, the world is dominated by sovereign states, 193 of whom belong to the United Nations, most of whom also contain smaller, more localized governments. It is the common good of this political community, and not simply the lives of its members, that is violated through attack from the outside. That community, situated in a territorial state, has a right not to be attacked. Such an attack violates the due of this collectivity. The common good, rather than lives alone, is thus the basis for the most fundamental tenet of international law and the just war ethic. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been widely condemned by many other states, including in the United Nations, as a blatant violation of the most fundamental norm of international law, political independence and territorial integrity, and a blatant instance of the key crime in this same law, international aggression. It is the crime of Nazi Germany when it invaded Poland and other European states, Imperial Japan when it conquered other states in the Western Pacific, and Iraqi President Saddam Hussein in 1990 when he invaded Kuwait. As a matter of morality, it is a crime against the most fundamental norm of the just war ethic, that forbidding attack, and it justifies the use of arms in self-defense. Ukraine emerged as a nation in the late 18th and early 19th century, when a people with a common language developed a consciousness of itself, a common history, a common literature, and over the course of this period, a desire to govern itself politically. This quest was denied mostly until 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and 92% of Ukrainians voted in favor of independence in December of that year. Now, it might be asked, if nationalism is an expression of the common good of a people, isn't it often the case that the borders of a sovereign state contain one or more national peoples who are not members of the majority or dominant nation of the state? And might they legitimately secede in the cause of their self-determination? The four eastern provinces of Ukraine, as well as Crimea, especially those that Russia is now seeking to maintain occupation of, are inhabited by large populations of ethnic Russians. Are they rightfully seen as part of the Ukrainian state? Or if nationality defines the particular people who enjoys a common good, may they rightfully be joined with Russia? Elsewhere, I have defended the principle of self-determination, including national secession, based on a natural law defense of the common good. The same natural law, a universal ethic, though, also places limits on self-determination. For instance, a national people who belongs to one state and seeks to join another must choose self-determination in a supermajority referendum and must respect the full human rights and citizens of minorities in its own midst. Never ought a people to be seized and annexed in lieu of a peaceful and popular transfer of governance. This amounts to the crime of aggression. This defeats many, if not most, self-determination movements. But some are legitimate. Ukraine, after all, itself seceded from the Soviet Union in 1991, quite legitimately, in my view. In the case of the eastern Ukrainian regions of Luhansk and Donetsk, these peoples have conducted no genuine referendums, and indeed polls show that majorities are in favor of remaining with Ukraine. Indeed, popular opinion in these regions has only become more sympathetic to remaining with Ukraine since Russia's invasion of February 2022. One can see the same shift in the churches, where support for the newly unified Ukrainian Orthodox Church has increased, while many priests in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate have denounced the invasion, and parishes have broken away to join the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. That Putin staged sham referendums in these regions in late September only testifies to his inability to secure genuine popular consensus for such a shift. In 2014, a small minority of pro-Russian separatists in the Donbass region, consisting of the oblast of Luhansk and Donetsk, arose against the Ukrainian government. Far from respecting the human rights of their fellow citizens, they used armed force against a legitimate government and its military there. They have been supported by the Russian government, which has contested Ukraine's independence and borders. This was followed by the entry of Russian troops in these regions and war on and off up to the Russian invasion of February 2022. True, in the Crimea, strong majorities, as determined by reliable German polls, have favored Russia's annexation in March 2014. Still, the annexation took place through a conquest, also an act of aggression, and was recognized as such by the vast majority of the international community of states. President Putin and Patriarch Kirill deny the very common good whose value is at stake. They have spoken again and again of the conflict as one where Russia is reclaiming a part of Russia or rescuing Russians from fascists, and speak of the people of Ukraine as a figment of peasant folklore, if they speak of it at all. Kirill views himself as head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, despite the fact that it was recently unified as an autocephalous Ukrainian church. It is only by denying the common good of a nation that Putin and Kirill call Russia's acts a military operation, but not an invasion or even a war. In effect, they are denying that a people with a common good, exist. In doing so, argue analysts such as Yale historian Timothy Snyder, they are perpetrating a genocide. The common good of a people is the core stake in the war. The failure to acknowledge this common good, I believe, is the flaw in certain criticisms of Ukraine's resistance and of the support for it on the part of Western countries. One version of this criticism comes from advocates of peace proposals. Some of these come from long-standing activists for peace and nonviolence. Rightly, they wish to bring an end to the loss of life and destruction. Peace proposals are important to advance and might provide the basis for a settlement when the time is ripe. Increasingly, in the United States, certain conservative politicians are also calling for a winding down of U.S. support and for immediate negotiations to end the war, even without a full Russian withdrawal. The question, though, about any proposal is whether it allows Russia to retain its conquest, particularly in the 4 eastern provinces. At present, Putin has showed no willingness to abandon these annexed lands. It is possible and justifiable, in my view, that an agreement might allow for a more gradual solution to Crimea, such as joint international occupation, and later a more just referendum. A just peace is one that leaves intact the territory of Ukraine. One that accedes to conquest is one that fails to recognize that the integrity of the common good of a national people, and in so doing, invites a future of renewed conquest. In short, any end to the war must not also mean the end of Ukraine. A second version of this criticism comes from the realist school of international relations thought. Not long after Russia's invasion of Ukraine this past February, a lecture delivered by political scientist John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago, the world's most famous international relations scholar, in 2015 went viral, in which he chastises the U.S. and its allies for provoking Russia by seeking to secure Ukraine's alignment with the West. Speaking again in March 2022, Mearsheimer charged that the West bears primary responsibility for the war and repeated the same logic. The 2015 talk now has over 28 million hits on YouTube and many admirers. Mearsheimer's logic is based on his balance of power theory. In short, when a great power's sphere of influence is violated, it will use force to preserve this sphere. The United States, which indicated interest in Ukraine joining NATO, along with openness to integrate Ukraine into the European Union, provoked Russia, which insists that Ukraine be tied to the East. The logical problem with Mearsheimer's argument is that it wrongly derives practical knowledge about what we ought to do from theoretical knowledge about how nations behave. Balance of power theory, though, says nothing at all about what it is right or wrong to do, or about what rights states have. It is a descriptive empirical theory which cannot generate moral norms. From a moral standpoint, Russia has no right to object to Ukraine's alignment with the West. Even should Ukraine join NATO, which was a distant prospect at the time of Russia's invasion, it would pose no threat to the integrity of Russia. NATO was formed as a defensive alliance in 1949, precisely against the Soviet threat, and has never supported international aggression, even remotely, in its 74-year history. Nor does Ukraine developing economic or other ties with Europe threaten anything that Russia may rightfully claim. Again, it is only if Russia denies that Ukraine has a national common good, one that merits it territorial integrity, that it may rightfully deny Ukraine's right to form the alliances and alignments that befit its status as a sovereign state. Realists, like peace advocates, may more plausibly root their arguments in the virtue of prudence, a virtue of practical reason, rather than balance of power theory. They might argue that it is imprudent to provoke Russia, or they might object to the cost of the war in lives, in humanitarian cost, in economic expense, in damage to the world economy, or in the risk of nuclear war. Proponents of this view argue today, for instance, that Ukraine should enter into negotiations to bring the fighting to a halt. It is difficult to judge, however, when costs become prohibitive of supporting Ukraine's resistance. These costs must be scaled against the injustice of Russia retaining Ukrainian territory, the cost of world order of Russia getting away with its aggression, and should the West be deterred by Putin's nuclear threat, the costs that arise from Putin, or China for that matter, becoming convinced that they can secure conquest by wielding that nuclear threat. While such questions of balancing and proportionality admit of no bright lines or definitive answers, my sympathies come down on the part of the Ukrainians and their common good. I have argued that Ukraine's struggle meets the criterion of just cause based on its common good. There are other important criteria of the just war ethic. There is right authority, which is not really at issue. Ukraine is justly commanded by its president. There is right intention, which is not disputed. Ukraine's true cause must be its just cause, defending itself. One that is disputed is reasonable prospect of success. Does Ukraine have a prospect of military victory? This is questioned by the analyst, and again, no clear answer is available. I only observe that the question is not simply one of material capacity, but one of will and commitment. Only will can explain why Ukraine succeeded when so many did not think it could. Recall that few outsiders thought that Ukraine would resist Russia's invasion for more than a few days after the invasion of February 2014. Conversely, few accepted that the Russian military has proven as weak as it has, largely one could argue for lack of morale and will. There are also criteria for fighting a war justly, or jus in bello, most importantly, discriminating between combatants and non-combatants. This standard only enhances Russia's injustice and the just of Ukraine's struggle on account of Russia's many war crimes in the course of the war. If at the heart of justice is Ukraine's right to its territorial integrity based on its national common good, Christian justice, which the Church is sympathetic to Ukraine espouse and enact, also involves performing obligations that are wider than what is owed to others as rights. In the past few years, I have been thinking and writing about the Christian meaning of justice. In summary, I argue that justice in the Bible means something wider than what is meant by the constant will to render another his due, a definition that originates in Roman law, that came to be enshrined in the Christian tradition in the Middle Ages, and that is dominant in Western society and is equivalent to its notion of rights. Justice in the Bible entails obligations that correspond to the rights of others, as well as ones that do not correspond to their rights: mercy, generosity, hospitality, gift, forgiveness, reconciliation, and others. This justice may be called comprehensive right relationship. When it is addressed to the wounds of the past from past wrongs, it is a matter of restoring right relationship, also known as reconciliation. We can see this wide justice in the declaration of the Greek and Roman Catholic bishops in Ukraine that this year is a year of mercy, dedicated to showing solidarity with people whom the war has rendered poor and needy. These and the Ukrainian Orthodox churches have made great efforts to assist refugees and internally displaced people and to meet humanitarian needs. The combination of what is due and what is beyond due will be relevant too in the justice of restoring right relationship, or of reconciliation when the fighting finally comes to an end. Here again arises the relevance of the insight of St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, that a just war is one that is fought for a just peace. A just peace would involve not only the full restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, but also measures which aim to restore right relationship between Ukraine and Russia and address the wounds of the war. Many of these would involve practices that have become more common in global politics in the past generation: truth-telling and acknowledgement, global criminal courts, reparations, political apologies, and forgiveness. These involve a combination of what is due and what goes beyond due. Most of these do not stand a chance of being realized at the present moment, but incorporating them into Ukraine's war aims lays the foundation for them to be realized in the future. Here are a few practices that would fulfill what is due. One is war crimes trials. Ukrainians and even Russians have a right to see the top planners of the war tried and justly punished for the act of aggression and the war crimes committed in the war. Here, the indictment of President Putin by the International Criminal Court is important, giving legitimacy to international judicial punishment of him. Russia ought to be removed of its place in the UN Security Council and in international organizations. A lustration policy towards leading Russian officials who planned and carry out the war ought to be implemented. Another is reparations, to which Ukrainians have a right and which have become more common in international politics and the subject of a set of guidelines in the United Nations. Russia owes Ukraine the full cost of material damage. A truth commission that reveals the full extent of Russia's war aims, its denial of Ukraine's existence as a nation, its narrative of history which performs this denial, Patriarch Kirill's full support of this narrative, and the details of the targeting of civilians, infrastructure, and war crimes would fulfill what is emerging in international law as a right to truth. Still another is apology on the part of the Russian head of state, presumably a successor to Putin. In the past generation, political apologies have become common in global politics. For instance, contemporary chancellors and presidents of Germany have expressed contrition towards the crimes of the Nazi regime. But there are other important goods which don't fit as easily in what is due to people and indeed go to be beyond due. Broader than the right to know the truth about the war, a broader international commitment to develop a truthful narrative of Russia's aims and its history of actions towards its neighbors in light of moral norms known through natural law, reflected in international law and basic human rights, would reflect a constructive act of peace building on the part of the community of nations. Romanticizing Russian history and underestimating its crimes and conquest helped to pave the way for the invasion. Along the lines of truth, but also beyond a strict right, is acknowledgement or empathetic recognition. This would involve telling the stories of Ukrainians and other victims of the war through the public hearings of truth commissions and through museums and forms of art. Generous assistance in rebuilding from other nations, while not strictly determined by rights, would reflect a mercy and generosity that is also a matter of enlightened self-interest, something akin to the Marshall Plan after World War II. Prompt Ukrainian accession to NATO and the EU would reflect solidarity with Ukraine and a commitment to its security on the part of fellow nations. In a Christian notion of justice as restoration of right relationship, one of the most distinctive practices is that of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a difficult principle to bring up when a people is in the midst of war. Yet the Lord commands it to his followers in strong terms in the Gospels. Forgiveness is in no way incompatible with the pursuit of justice in the forms of national self-defense, accountability for war crimes, and other measures. It would be practiced by individuals who relinquish the moral debt owed to them by those who attack them and will their good. Forgiveness has strikingly become a part of global discourse over the past generation, advocated most famously by Pope John Paul II and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, but also voiced and practiced on the ground by ordinary individuals in South Africa, Chile, Northern Ireland, Rwanda, and Uganda. My own study of forgiveness in Uganda among 640 people who lived through zones of war showed that 86% of them favored the practice of forgiveness and 68% had practiced it. Their Christian faith was the primary factor that motivated them. In Iraq, Chaldean Bishop Bashar Warda has voiced forgiveness for Islamic militants, even as he continues to insist loudly upon the justice of religious freedom and civic equality for Christians. Forgiveness, when integrated with the other practices, contributes to building a just peace after conflict. It is important to emphasize again that these many and large aims are not ones that can be expected to be achieved today, tomorrow, or any time soon. Yet incorporating them into Ukraine's war aims today enhances that military struggle by giving it added definition and purpose. The anti-apartheid movement in South Africa is one that advocated forgiveness and reconciliation, even as it struggled for an end to the apartheid government. Building on the classic argument of Augustine and Aquinas that the aim of a just war is a just peace, I seek to expand the meaning of a just peace along the lines of a Christian concept of justice, rooted in the Bible, that renders what is due and what is beyond due. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Philpott, for the excellent speech. And I would like some brief feedback from two of our colleagues at UKU, who teaches as a faculty of theology and are also students in our doctoral program. First, I want to invite Yuri Martinyuk, the Deputy Dean of the Theological Faculty, to give short feedback.
So dear participants of the round table, it's a great honor to intervene after the world-known expert of just peace, Professor Philpott, and share with you some reflections. I would share a few shorter remarks and one wider concerning issue of common good. So the first shorter reflection concerning the genuine referendum in Donetsk and Luhansk. I'm convinced that genuine referendum in Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea as well was only once in the history in 1991, when more than 83% in Luhansk and Donetsk and almost 55% in Crimea voted for independence. Narrative of having normal referendum in occupation territories is a repeat of Russian propaganda, is unreal condition. First, we need to turn back all displaced people, rebuild infrastructure, remove artificially inhabited people, so the task is unreal. By proposing unreal tasks, Russia intends to win the time, to win the space for maneuvers. My second reflection concerns the forgiveness and the victim. To forgive is not equal to forget. It is true that forgiveness is important for victim, is a part of wound treatment, but doesn't exist the forced forgiveness. And the victim has a right to forgive at the right time decided by victim. True forgiveness is possible only after the aggressor's guilty plea. And my wider reflection concerns the common good, the idea, the concept of common good. So summarizing the concept of common good in the social doctrine of Catholic Church, we can define it in a nutshell like the most favorable conditions for everyone's prosperity or everyone's flourishing. This concept of common good is deeply based on recognition and respect of everyone's dignity of every person. The aim to achieve common good is a task of cooperation between all members of society, especially between authority and citizens. To be common, the good should be valuable for everyone, especially for current political order and authority, and shared by them. In the time of values mismatch between people and governance, we had a peaceful protests named Maidan in 2004 and 2013, resulting turn back to the common values. Never autocratic, but always democratic political order was valuable in Ukraine society. An assumption that the same concept of common good is shared by every society is a great mistake. In Russian society, the idea of common good corresponds to the concept of collective pride, resentment of the past or elusive mighty. It has name, Ruski Mir, Russian world. This feeling is shared by Russian political authority and society. Russian people and authority can sacrifice everything, lives, dignity, truth, prosperity, just for gaining the feeling of mighty. We have examples not only in current war, but we have examples like doping scandals in sport, lies in TV propaganda, case of submarine Kursk. So I agree with Professor Philpott that we have war of common good, Ukrainian, democratic one, and Russian, autocratic, dangerous model for the whole world. The main principles of the Catholic concept of common good are principles of solidarity and subsidiarity. Now we can see how these principles realized in Ukrainian and international area. Great volunteer movement, humanitarian aid, military support, and the clear position of the allies show us an efficiency of the concept of common good. We can feel us really as members of democratic brotherhood. The next outcome of the Russian aggression we have in Ukraine is reassessment of the social role of soldier, his importance and value. Human dignity is inviolable and unbreakable magnitude to be respected. And many heroic examples of our soldiers worth more than high speeches and verify the Ukrainian fighting. As conclusion to my comment, I would like to affirm that we have only one real option. This option is to win. Because we are dealing not only with self-protection, self-defense, but with defense of common good of democratic world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuri. And I ask for a short feedback from Andriy Tretyak, who is writing his doctoral thesis on the topic, the problem of war and peace in the Catholic theological thought and pastoral practice from the 20s to the early 21st century. So please, Andriy, share with us your reflection.
Thank you once again, Professor Philpott, for your presentation and your thoughts. It was full of interesting ideas, and I think that we have to work more on. And I'm honored, but also stressed and nervous a little bit. So I beg your pardon if I would sound somehow inconsistent during my comments. I want focus more on like 3 points that, in my opinion, that haven't been present in the speech we just heard. First one is hybrid dimension of war. Mainly, also it is known as kind of asymmetric warfare in the scholar literature. This dimension is often neglected, but due to growing technological possibilities and resources, the coverage and the success of propaganda dramatically increased in recent decades. As a prominent example, and that began this era of new technology in propaganda, it's the elections in the United States when Trump won it, and everyone saw how dangerous it is and how successful it is. If we move into our context, the war in Ukraine, and there are many examples of Russian propaganda that is dedicated to different social groups and works in different levels on internet, on the media, and so on. Some of them are easily recognizable, like slogans, Ukrainians are Nazis, or some fairy tales of crucified boys and so on. But there are many more that are propaganda that is multi-layered and complex. One of the most prominent scholars who research this propaganda, Peter Pomerantsev, he names two main aspects of why it is successful. One is emotions and emotional appeal, and the second one is the construction of artificial reality, when in informational environment full of different data, there is a noise made by a lot of different fakes or other information that in some way dilute the reality that we live on. One more example that is easily grasped by now, but especially media haven't been prepared for this in 2014, when strange fighters with weapons appeared in Donbass, and it was a lot of confusion how to call them, and different names appeared: separatists, combatants, fighters, and it led to the confusion of their goal. Even today, we can see that it plays a huge role with what term to use to name these fighting groups. As far as we know in Ukraine, that they are puppets of Russia, and they want to achieve this full integration with Russian state, as we saw recently during this so-called integration. But in 2014, it was a lot of mess, and the idea of civil war in Ukraine, and possible idea, and the also idea of separatism as a valid Donbas nation that struggled for it, it all complicated the big picture of what was going on and how to interpret the war that started in 2014. Another example that we can feel and see today is the narrative that Russia tries to spread, that presents Russia and its leaders like a monkey with a granite. It probably is a funny one, and it presents Russians as a little bit crazy, but it works very well for global audience, as it works in this emotional level when pairing Russia with fear of unpredictability. And this can, in some discussions, move and bring the idea of sacrificing and appeasing Ukraine, for example, in order not to provoke this unrational leaders, because what we have today, this monkey is not with a granite anymore, it's with nukes. It's more dangerous, but it plays in this level of emotion, which is very dangerous one. And we saw how it worked, and because of that, there is a big dangers that it can work again, as we can recall the war in Georgia, when Russia firstly tried to use its expansion and its hybrid occupation of parts of the independent state, and then try to negotiate with the West for a new condition, and so new start of relationship. And for 2 years, after 2 years of the invasion, new deals and have been established with Russia, and it was this country was embraced again into the big world community. And it is a big danger for today that it also can manipulate with this fear, and we have to be attentive that this is only a play Russia's propaganda uses. Maybe one more example, as I was shocked when this notes of propaganda appear not only on a political debate or on the sphere of some general discussion, but also more on the level of discussion of in theology, theological one. On the eve of Russian full-scale invasion, there appeared an article by probably a renowned scholar, Ellie McCarthy, who worked a lot on the just peace and other moral questions of and in his proposition, in his article, what to do with the conflict that apparently would be a war in few days, he gave a cardinal and drastically different propositions that we heard today from Professor Philpott, that is rational one, as just war reaction of self-defense. But he proposed, Ellie McCarthy proposed an idea that the ideal would be for Ukraine, not to fight, but to make a revolution, as it had been in 2004 and 2014, and change pro-war regime, pro-war government in Ukraine to the pro-peace government. And only this can solve the problem in Christian, as he calls, in Christian way, and not in the way of secular political one. What is also in this moment, what is shocking that Ukraine really tries a non-violent approach to the conflict in 2014 during the occupation of Crimea. This non-violence approach, like when Ukrainian soldiers didn't use weapon and pulled back all the forces trying to reach the communicate with Russian for this dialogue of for peace, but it didn't work out to sustain any peace in Crimea, nor it helped locals to avoid terror. For we know today a lot of examples of tortures and all other crimes, and it wasn't bloodless occupation. Because of that, today many Ukrainians regret that no military response have been used then, and only after a few months it started in Donbass, and it stopped the spread of this Russian world. Maybe as a concluding point, I want to make it that despite all the horrors that we see and that is still happening and probably would be happening for some time, we can also have a hope that the war we have in Ukraine and the world that seizes this war and seizes Ukrainians who are who show extreme amounts of solidarity, love, and compassion. And this example of Ukrainians will motivate the world to change itself a little bit. I'm not naive to say that the war in Ukraine would be the last one. World War II had to be the last war, but it never succeeded. And war in Ukraine wouldn't be the last one, but it could serve as an example for a reform or renovation of international order in such a way that the reaction of global world to any new conflict, new war would be quicker, and some big players like United Nations would be more effective in global policing, and the approach, different theoretical approaches that exist would be transmitted into reality and had more chances to really stop the violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Thank you for both of you for your beautiful feedbacks. I propose taking a short coffee break for 20 minutes. After that, we will continue our panel session with the president of UKU and the Metropolitan of Philadelphia, His Eminence, Archbishop Boris Guziak. Okay, Professor Philpott, would you like to add something to our feedbacks?
Well, yes, first of all, I want to say thank you for terrific comments and excellent observations, both of which I learned a lot. I think Mr. Martinyuk is right. I think the about referendums and Donetsk and Luhansk, and in fact, I would not propose referendums there. I only think that just self-determination requires a bona fide referendum. And I think the referendums of fall 2022 were sham referendums, were not true referendums. And I think that there's no real reason for a referendum there. Crimea is different, but if there were ever going to be a referendum there, it would have to be after the war, 10-year international occupation, and a genuine one that perhaps could be a point of peace negotiation. But the Russian seizure in 2014, I think, was greatly unjust. On forgiveness, I do think it's correct. It has to be a freedom. It's up to the victim to do it. It should never be forced or scripted, and it does not stand in the way of a just war or just punishment or accountability or anything like that. And then on the common good, yes, a common good must be rooted in natural law and ordered to justice. One cannot say that it's part of one's common good to deny the common good of another, as does the Ruski Mir ideology. So I very much agree. And Ms. Tretiak, yeah, I think your insights about the kind of reverse logic of the West and Ukraine being blamed for provoking Russia. I mean, to me, it only begs the question of what Russia's just claims and rights are in the first place. Russia's claim to be provoked presupposes that Ukraine is part of its sphere of influence and territory, but that of course is the problem in the first place. And so anyway, I think people are probably ready for a coffee break here. And I thank you again for the privilege of addressing you, and know that my prayers are with you. And I think what Ms. Tretiak said, that Ukraine to me is a model that speaks to the rest of the world for its justice and its generosity. And I thank you for how much you've taught me.
Since you do not have a coffee break, you could have a nice conversation among yourself, as I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are already back, and I would like to give a floor to His Eminence Archbishop Boris Hudzak, who doesn't need any presentation in this community. Archbishop will speak about what we have learned about true justice and authentic peace, be concrete and put the victim first. And before Archbishop will start, I want to thank him because of he is in airport. He is a busy man. So we are grateful, even have a very dense time, you find a way to join us.
Thank you, Father Yudi. I am very honored by this invitation, and I'm learning from it. Although I'm traveling, I've been listening to the presentations, Professor Philpott's presentation, the commentary, and I'm enriched. So thank you very much. And I want to thank all of you for what you do for peace in the world and for justice in the world, and for everything you've been doing for the people of Ukraine and for the students and faculty of the Ukrainian Catholic University. I am by no means an expert in just war, just peace theory, but this last year has forced many of us to carefully consider what this war in Ukraine is and what war is in the light of the Russian aggression and the genocidal manifestations that have come to light. It is heartening to see natural law at work. So many people in so many countries have responded to what we can say philosophically are the rules of natural law. People's hearts, people's thoughts are largely in symphony when they have the information and where they live in a society where they can formulate their opinions freely and express them freely. I think there has been no global event in history that has created such a consensus among people of goodwill. This is, of course, beholden to contemporary technology. So on the one hand, I want to emphasize how important natural law is, and that it does exist, and that it does speak to people, and that people, quote unquote, hear it. People can understand basic principles of natural law. At the same time, we live in a time of great deconstruction, when different aspects of natural law, that consensus, whether it's anthropological, social, cultural, the various consensus that reigned sometimes for millennia, are being taken apart. Sometimes this dismantlement, this deconstruction is actually quite necessary and points to blind spots in our ethic, in our cultures and civilizations. Particularly, I think there would be little question about the need to dismantle all kinds of racisms, and particularly the notion of slavery, that somebody can be forced to be somebody else's slave or serf or servant. We live in a time of a great sensitivity to liberty, to personal liberty, which often translates into a great individualism and a loneliness. Epistemologically, it has generated a great subjectivity. That subjectivity is celebrated, I think, often naively in its extreme. And Pope Benedict has, not without cause, spoken about the dictatorship of relativism. There's your opinion, there's my opinion. Actually, everybody can have an opinion, and that personal right to have a perspective is then becomes criteria for truth claims. And so the truth claims become competing, and there is in many sectors and in many discourses today a discussion about the possibility of truth, or simply a negation of that possibility. So when we appeal to natural law, it is not an appeal that everybody is making, even though, as I said, I think there are many manifestations of the fact that natural law works, natural law exists. What then can be an easily identifiable criteria for our judgment and for our actions? Maintaining Catholic tradition, seeking to respond to various injustices, and most importantly, basing his teaching on the example of our Lord Jesus Christ, Pope Francis has time and time again focused on one fundamental criterion, that of the victim, or that of the poor, that of the marginalized. In Fratelli Tutti, he gives an exegesis of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Pope Francis has also repeatedly, and especially to us bishops and clergy, has I'm doing a conference. He has spoken about the fact that the example of Jesus given in this parable is that one of great concreteness, in which the man who has been knocked down, who has been stripped, who has been beaten, who is wounded, who is half dead, becomes the criteria for the decision, for the moral action. And the response to that concreteness is a spontaneous one. And it is a response of putting the victim first. I believe that in thinking about peace and justice in general, and in peace and justice in the circumstances of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in the circumstances of the thousands of war crimes that are being carefully documented by Ukrainian and international authorities, in the context of an unprecedentedly large wave of refugees. Never before in human history have 14 million people left their homes in a matter of 2 or 3 months so quickly. Of course, that is also because of the possibilities of modern transportation. This is not saying that the devastation in Ukraine is unprecedented. Unfortunately, it has many precedents, and it has been superseded in history, if only on Ukrainian territory, where in the 20th century during World War II, 7 million people were killed. So in this context, I think it is clear through the reaction of human hearts to minds guided by natural law that the voice and message and needs of the victim have to have a priority. If this is true, the question is it true in other cases? Well, one of the biggest issues facing the Catholic Church in the past generation has also guided us to this criteria. The scandalous phenomenon of the abuse of children by clergy, by others, the abuse of vulnerable people, was a question that bewildered. And there was a long, painful, and pain-inducing pilgrimage to see, how do we get out of this? How do we deal with it? And in the end, after the multiplication of pain, of harm, and of scandal that has greatly undermined the moral authority of the church has come to the conclusion, enunciated by many, but foremostly by Pope Francis, that the victim comes first. The victim comes first, and there can be zero tolerance for such violence against children, against the vulnerable, against those who are in the spiritual, under the spiritual care of moral ecclesial authorities. Zero tolerance and victim first. I think that there should be zero tolerance for this Russian aggression, and that the evident victim needs to become increasingly the criteria. As Professor Philpott eloquently explained, much of political science, international relations theory, does not consider such criteria. The realist school, Professor Mersheimer, Henry Kissinger, politicians like J.D. Vance and others who claim to be realists do not focus and depart from the fate of the victim. There are other concerns. Power politics calls us, as Professor Philpott reminded us, to be mindful of the virtue of prudence. We need to take care. We need to weigh and balance different factors. But in doing so, we should keep the victim at the center of our attention. We should be concrete. We should be not like the clergy that passed by the man in the downtrodden man in the parable of the Good Samaritan, who theoretically consider their actions, weigh various factors, of which often personal convenience or, let's say, group convenience is a decisive one. We should not be abstract. Pope Francis speaks to us, do not be abstract. Do not moralize in an abstract way, but see the people, see the orphans, see the maimed, the destroyed cities. I believe that looking into the face of the victims of this war in Ukraine will provide very important guidance for moral action, for political decisiveness. There's always a danger of a culture of victimization. There is always a danger that identity can be melded with victimhood. This is not the situation today. The victims are agents. They are not passive. They are not seeking to absolve themselves of responsibility. In fact, they are showing heroic virtue and the capacity to make the ultimate sacrifice. I thank all of you for the lifetime of work that you have dedicated or are dedicating to these issues. Today, the subject matter that you study is at the center of the big paradoxes, the big challenges in global history. And I believe your input will contribute to the fostering of justice, the fostering of peace. God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence. We are honored and privileged to listen to your, I would say, biblical wisdom, and it's inspiring word for all of us. And have a nice and safe flight. Now we are shifting from American continent to European continent, and I'm honored to invite to speak our long-term friend of UKU, Professor Dr. Heinz Gerhard Justenhofen, who is currently director of the Institute for Theology and Peace, Hamburg, Germany. Professor is not first time when he speaks to our audience. He joined
I'm finished. I was just doing a conference on the war in Ukraine. So it's free. Thanks.
Professor Justenhofen joined our events in Wrocław recently, and we are privileged and honored to have him among us, since he authored many books on the issue of just peace and war. And today he will speak why and what kind of just war must we deal with. Professor Justenhofen, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Father Yuri. Dear friends, I think I can, most of it I can follow to what Daniel Philpott, as already my colleague from Notre Dame has said, but I would like to give you probably shed some light on the debate in Germany and give you an assessment from that side. First of all, I'd like to say a word to the headline: why and what kind of just war must we deal with? In the European context, especially in the German context, we don't use the just war term anymore. That has a lot to do with its roots being in medieval theology and then the concept of social order. And the basic idea of the just war teaching of Augustine, especially of Thomas Aquinas, was that by using bellum, the medieval idea of legitimate violence, to restore a political order against the perpetrator. So the idea was to use, as we would say today, military force to restore a given, especially social order, or even to defend it against an external enemy. Now, with the UN Charter in the 20th century, we have a totally different assessment of when military force can be used or not. And it's on the background of two exhausting wars that destroyed, had enormous destruction in Europe and beyond, with millions of dead and cities destroyed in my country, in Poland, in France, in Belgium, in Holland, many countries. Then the idea was that military force to restore whatever order or for whatever political interests shall not be used, and therefore the only case that is legitimate for using military force is the collective defense against an aggression or the right of self-defense, as it is in the UN Charter. And even if you look into Christian ethics, you find this shift. This is in the teaching of Benedict XV at the end of the First World War, or Pope Pius XII at the end of the Second World War, and definitely in the documents of the Vatican Council or in the peace encyclical of John the 23rd, that justified defense against an aggression may be legitimate under certain very limited criteria, but definitely we would not use military force, military power to enforce or restore whatever order or political interests. So that's why I would rather stick to the term, as my colleague Daniel Philpott actually did, that we use the term of just peace, and knowing that whenever the right of self-defense is applied or is necessary, that it's to restore peace, as I said before. Let me give you some ideas of why this war happened. And I think Dan has shed light already on it, but I would like to enforce this idea. The core cause, to my opinion, of Putin's war against Ukraine is the ongoing and successful fight for autonomy in Ukraine. It's not, as Bishop Boris just said, it's not a question of liberty, it's a question of autonomy, which is something different. It's the fight for individual autonomy and political autonomy, which in the end means self-determination. That sort of political self-determination is definitely a threat to the Kremlin's autocracy and to all the post-Soviet autocrats. And that's why the Kremlin reacted so brutal against the opposition in Russia in the years 2012 and later on, as it reacted to Ukraine's fight for self-determination. Daniel already talked about the realist theory and their idea of great powers and their fight for influence, and the small countries being within the realm of one or the other's power region, so to speak. And that is quite a debate in our country, whether NATO's eastern expansion actually was the casus belli for Putin. And my argument is, even if it were, the fight for self-determination in Poland, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in the Baltic countries, they all showed that these peoples took their right for self-determination and their right to decide in how they wanted, by which political order they wanted to live, and under which protection in the end. And especially if you take the Polish case, as Dan already pointed out, Poland the discussion showed that neither they were trusting Russia nor their Western neighbors of Germany because of their historical experiences. And that's why the only trust they had were in the US, which meant in NATO. So we have been talking about Ukraine's right to self-defense, which to my opinion is morally and juridically justified. Russia has no right to wage war, as the UN General Assembly on March 2 of last year definitely decided, because Russia could not convince and with its complaints. And that's why, as far as I recall, 141 states voted for Ukraine's right for self-defense and only 5 for Russia, which really means that within the world public, if you wish, the debate showed within this parliament of the world, UN General Assembly, there is an overwhelming acceptance of Ukraine's rights to self-defense. This right is not unlimited, it's limited by the principles of our just war tradition, of our peace ethics tradition. Daniel has been talking about the principles of proportionality, of discrimination, of sufficiency. Both sides have to adhere to them, even the Russian troops as well, it's no question. And it's very unfortunate that we are witnessing war crimes basically every day. The attack on civilian infrastructure, on civilians, on hospitals and schools, they are all cases that the International Court of Criminal Justice will deal with. And this is, to my understanding, from a moral side, what we need to do is to strengthen the International Court of Criminal Justice. It would be much better, it would be helpful if all states would submit to the International Court of Criminal Justice. And we still have the problem that especially politically powerful states are hesitant to submit to the court. And that's why there is, it has only a limited reach, but still we will see that international lawyers are working hard to make sure that as much war crimes as possible will be addressed by the international jurisdiction. In my country, the last resort argument, the question whether the use of military violence is really last resort has been debated, especially within the peace movement, but beyond. And one of the issues that has been addressed is whether there was a willingness on the side of the Ukrainian government in April last year in Istanbul to negotiate sort of a peace treatment, and whether NATO, or especially the British Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, undermined these attempts. But if one really looks into negotiations, it is obvious that the basic issues on the future of Crimea and the Donbass on one side, and the issue of future security for Ukraine, and the stances of both sides, of Russia and the Ukrainian government, were so diverse that negotiations at that time seemed unrealistic. Anyhow, it's a debate, and I thought I should let you know about this. That's the reason why, from my side, I always keep arguing that as a last resort, yes, the Western countries need to supply adequate means to support the Ukrainian self-defense, and adequate means the supply of heavy weaponry. You all know that, especially in Germany, the government was very hesitant and only recently has declared its willingness to support. But finally, the Leopard tanks and other weaponry from Western Europe are on the way to Ukraine, and we hope that they will make a difference. There's one criteria, the prospect of success. Dan has talked about it, and I think what we have seen is that, on one hand, military experts were pretty sure at the beginning that Ukraine had no chance against the Russian army. And it showed that that we can never really be sure when waging the prospect of success, especially in war, so that we have the probability of whether one side or not can be successful. But as we have seen, the probability of Putin being able to achieve his political goals have diminished rapidly, and as far as we can tell now, it is more likely that Ukraine will have the prospect of success in the future. What I think, and I'm very happy and grateful that we have been at least talking about the need for what is happening after the war. I think, especially as Christians, we need to think of the next steps. At the same time, with reference to the process of reconciliation between Germany and France, or Germany and Poland, I'd like to warn. This is a process that takes 1 or 2 generations. And the first step, before any steps in the direction of reconciliation can be made, the perpetrator needs to accept and adhere to the injustice committed. And I'm not sure whether we will see this in the near future. So much. Thank you very much.
Professor, for wonderful talk. And our next speaker is Dr. Irina Fenno, who is guest researcher of Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, and she also works at Kyiv Center of UKU. She will speak about a rhetoric of war and peace in the statements of religious organization and speeches of heads of Christian churches. So, dear Irena, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great honor for me to participate in this joint project of the Ukrainian Catholic University and the University of Notre Dame, as well as to make a short presentation on this event. Thank you very much for the invitation. And the main topic of our roundtable is related to the just peace. And today we try to understand what does it mean, just peace in Ukrainian context. Therefore, it's illogical that the next question should be who or what institutions should be spread this idea of just peace, and how churches can be promoters of this idea in Ukraine as well. But before that, I offer you a brief analysis of how the churches responded to the war through the speeches and the messages of the leaders of the Christian communities. Russia's full-scale military aggression against Ukraine in February 2024 put the churches in the need of determining their attitude of this war. The differences in position demonstrated by the Christian religious leaders, Pope Francis, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, has also actualized the need to comprehend Christian approaches to the issue of war and peace, justice, reconciliation, peace building in the light of the new challenges of 21st century. All these, in turn, raises the question of the conformity of the public statements and the actions of church hierarchy and individual clergy to the fundamental precepts and the values of the Christianity. The largest Christian communities in Ukraine, in the formation of socially oriented statesmen and the position of the war, rely on social teachings and the documents of their ecclesiastical centers located outside Ukraine. Taking into account the position of the confessional centers, it's now worth to consider and analyze the statements of the leaders of the Christian churches of Ukraine regarding the war and their receptions and the reactions to the way the hostilities unfold Ukraine. To identify the main contact accents, all public speeches, statesmen, sermons, and interviews of the leaders of these three largest Christian communities in Ukraine, I mean Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, and Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, were analyzed during the period from February till December 2022, and the semantic connotations and the accents can indicate the different directions of interpretations. Statements, narrative messages conveyed by the Christian churches in Ukraine are important. Because on the one hand, churches are witnessing the war and experiencing these horrors, but on the other hand, they are voices of the suffering people to the international religious communities. All primates on the first day of the full-scale invasion made the official appeals, in which they clearly articulated their position. Even here, we can observe the closeness in the expressed narratives between the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and the slightly different position on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate. And I would like to give you some examples and the quotation of the different sermons and interview, just to be clear in my opinion. First, it is worth paying attention to how the primates of these churches defined the event that began on February 24th and how they determined the nature of these events. So, in the speech of Metropolitan Epiphanius, we can find he emphasized that absolute injustice, unprovoked, and insidiousness of the attack on Ukraine by Russia and Belarus, and called those who started this and are waging the aggressive war against Ukraine, murderers and the criminals, according to the law of God and the human laws. Supreme Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk, in his addresses, stresses the treacherous enemy, despite its own commitments and assurance, breaking the basis norms of international law, is an injustice aggressor stepped on the Ukrainian land, bringing death and destructions. At the same time, Metropolitan Onufriu expressed more restraint. The quotation, "Unfortunately, Russia has started military actions against Ukraine." And I would like to mention the second point, which is also significant in this topic. To whom did the head of the churches appeal, and what did they call for? Religious leaders of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, emphasizing the peacefulness as a trait of the Ukrainian people. But in this situation, they called for the protection of Ukraine and active participation in the struggle for the people and for the country. Metropolitan Epiphany mentioned that the common task was to repel the enemy, to protect the native land, future and the future of the new generation from the tyranny. Supreme Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk mentioned, "Our Ukraine calls us today to defend its dignity before God and the humanity, its right to exist and the right to choose its future. This is our natural right and the sacred duty." Instead, Metropolitan Onufriu called to be courageous and to show love to your homeland and for each other, also to intensify repentant prayer for Ukraine, for our army, for our people, and ask to forget mutual quarrels and misunderstanding, and unite in love for God and for our motherland. He appealed to the president of Russia and asked him immediately stop the fratricidal war. And a few days later, it was a synod of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. And in the document of this, as a result of this synod, expressed a much more neutral position. We can find the quotation, "The war has come in our native land. Almost all over the territory of Ukraine, fighting continues between the troops of Russian Federation and the armed forces in Ukraine. And it's indicative to avoid the fixing the fact that the Russians attack Ukraine, criticism of Russia or recognition the injustice. And the Synod appeals to the President of Ukraine and the President of Russian Federation with a request to do everything possible to put an end to the scene of armed confrontation between our fraternal peoples and to begin the negotiation process. They appeal to the both presidents, as well as a reference to the scene of the armed confrontation between two fraternal peoples, clearly fixed the assignment the joint responsibility for the both countries. In later speeches and the sermons, the causes and the nature of the war are explored in a more detailed way, in which demonstrate even more clearly the differences in approaches of the heads of the two Orthodox churches. Metropolitan Epiphany reasonable asked, did the peaceful residents of Mariupol, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Bucha, and so on do something evil or worthy of punishment against Moscow? They have not done anything like that, but they are suffering. They suffer as martyrs. And what we can find in the speech of Metropolitan Onufriu, the quotation, "We pray today that the Lord will stop what we feel today. When the people die, human blood is shed, children die, helpless, old, young, so on. They are all victims of our ambitions and our claims." It is necessary to point that the Metropolitan Onufriu speaks about the war in the abstract form in the most of his speeches. Sometimes like that, the war appears as the consequences of sin, the punishment of God, and we must ask the Lord for forgiveness for our sin. And also, there is a hidden accusation of ourselves in this, that is the people and the Ukrainian in particular, when he spoke about the victims of our ambitions and our claims. What does it mean, the word ours? Ukrainian, then the narrative is promoted the Ukrainians are guilty. If ours means both Ukrainians and Russians, then the narrative is a common guilt is spoiled. Or this ours means just human, then it's also too abstract and it's an evasion of calling the enemy and the aggressor by name. Another significant aspect that you need the position of the on the war, the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, it's a recognition of its genocidal nature. This is clearly reflected in the speeches of religious leaders, especially after the deoccupation of the Kiev regions. Instead, in the speeches of Onufris, there is not a single word about this. And to a greater extent, it's again and again frustrated confrontation or the war between two fraternal peoples. And also for the concept of the peace and the peace building, it's largely present in the call to prayer for peace in the speeches of religious leaders. In general, the pacifist language of the official documents and the social teachings is understandable. But at the level of application, when it comes to the specific war in a specific time, at the time of escalation and the brutal action of the aggressor, it's important to emphasize the impossibility of the sacrificing peace for the sake of truth. And the Metropolitan Epiphany and the Supreme Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk insist on this. And a few examples. Metropolitan Epiphanius, referring to the historical experience from the Ukrainian people, underlined that the Russia captivity occupation will turn into even the worst catastrophe for us. If we don't fight the Russian war to victory now, it will kill, maim, destroy, and put the chains to the slavery everything and everyone. And we as a people have chosen the truth and the freedom, and we don't want to exchange them for the false peace. And Supreme Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk speaks about the peace not just in a theological way or frame, but taking into account the social political circumstances. We as a church teach to build a peace, but for the Kremlin, peace means the pacification of the colony in concrete. This is a peace that needs to be imposed. It means the compulsion of peace. In fact, it is about surrender. Thus, the concept of war and peace, their practical dimension, ethical and the theological explanations have entered to the everyday rhetoric and the activity of the Christian churches in Ukraine. Analysis of the fundamental and the basic positions of the head of the Ukrainian Christian communities showed commonalities in many issues, but also revealed the differences. The difference in rhetoric, interpretations, and the approaches to the war and the peace correlated with the fact that this war has put the churches before the need for a very clear understanding and articulation of their identity. And if for the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, it didn't require any special additional actions, but for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate, it became a real problem. Firstly, for the Orthodox Church, for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, rather loud and sometimes ambitious wording of the head of the church, I mean Metropolitan Onufri, and especially the lack of the direct condemnation of the position of Patriarch Kirill. Any words about the destruction of the churches and the killed, captured priests lead to the loss of the authority and the trust to this structure. And the steps that were taken into the local council in May 2022 with the proclamation of its own autonomy and the independence from the Moscow, in practice didn't lead for any concrete actions. For the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, thanks to the quite accurate and the sharp statement of the head of this church, with the criticism of Patriarch Kirill, Putin, Russia, Russian world, this religious organization is strengthening its position. The process of changing the jurisdiction of religious communities, I mean the transition from the one to another structure from the Moscow Patriarchate to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, have intensified. And for the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which is the experience the total persecution and the prohibition during the domination of the totalitarian Soviet regime. is very clearly aware that the threats to the faith and the existence posed by the domination of dictatorship and totalitarian Soviet regime, the experience of resistance, endurance, and the indomitable spirit of the priest and the faithful of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church gained to the previous century, deprived of any illusions about the modern Putin regime and its consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irena, for your wonderful, I would say, passionate speech. And finally, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Anatoly Babensky, who works at the Institute of the Church History at UKU, whom already Professor Philpott mentioned in his introductory remarks. Anatoly writes a lot of things, and he was speaking during the whole last year on different issues related to Russian aggression. So we are very glad that he will speak to all of us today. Anatoly, floor is yours.
Thank you. Glory to Jesus Christ. And good evening to the audience, and good morning to our American friends. I have a privilege to see the audience. I will speak about the ideology. I think this is very important when we are speaking about the just peace. Russia's invasion of Ukraine plunged Europe into the biggest war since World War II. It is being waged with all possible tools and means, from information and psychological and terrorist attacks. As the targets of Russian missile strikes are usually not military facilities, but generally places of daily life. We are dealing with an unprecedented case in history when terrorism, which the whole world can watch almost live, is being carried out not by a group of fanatics, but by a state with one of the world's largest nuclear arsenals. Many people are asking themselves why Russia can so quickly or easily commit awful crimes. One of the reasons it is so free to use terrorist attacks against the civilian population of Ukraine is that Russia simply revels in a sense of impunity. As the Ukrainian philosopher Volodymyr Yermolenko aptly described it, the essence of this war is the Russian sense of impunity. It is a kind of embodiment of the dream of impunity, the dream of crime without punishment. In my opinion, there is another reason why the Russians so easily resort to terrorist bombings and missile strikes, and in general, any available means of killing Ukrainians, both military and civilians. His Beatitude Sviatoslav Shevchuk, the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, has repeatedly compared the actions of the Russian military to those of the Islamic State, as in both cases, killing and destruction are justified by higher goals and religious motives. Since the beginning of the war, much criticism has been directed at the ideology of the Ruski Mir, or Russian world. However, it should be noted that that although both the secular leadership of Russia and Patriarch Kirill had devoted a lot of time and effort to spreading this ideology in previous decades, it has virtually disappeared from the rhetoric of Russian leaders since the outbreak of the war. Instead, Patriarch Kirill, who essentially blessed Russia's aggression against Ukraine, returned to the idea of Holy Rus, or Holy Russia, as it's also known in Western world. Previously, he sometimes identified it with the Russian world, but Holy Rus, or Russia, occupies much more important place in his worldview. To briefly summarize the essence of this ideology, it is based on the idea of Russia's exceptional place, not just in the history of the world, but in the history of salvation. An essential role in forming of this idea was this idea was played by the events of the 15th century, when the Moscow Church rejected the decisions of the Council of Florence and began to consider itself the last and only bastion of true Christianity on the earth. In the 19th century, Russian thinkers imagined the Holy Rus as a unique civilizational path of Russia. Its essence was to contrast the spiritual and mystical Russia with the rationalistic and materialistic West. Despite the anti-religious persecution in the first decades of the communist regime during the Second World War, the idea of Holy Rus was actively promoted by Russian hierarchs in the context of the victory over Nazi Germany. This further strengthened the Russian imagination of itself as the world's savior. After the collapse of the USSR, it was the Russian Orthodox Church that proposed the idea of Holy Russia to replace the bankrupt communist ideology. Later, sent to Patriarch Kirill, it became the foundation for the Russian world or Ruski Mir concept. According to philosopher and cultural critic Mikhail Epstein, compared to previous dominant ideas such as Orthodox Kingdom, Third Rome, Orthodoxy, autocracy and nationality, communism, class struggle, proletarian international, world revolution, real socialism, the Russian world or Ruski Mir seems to be a poor idea, devoid of content. In contrast to the Ruski Mir or Russian world, the idea of Holy Russia has a much more powerful mobilization potential. It refers to several ideas from the past mentioned by Epstein. Holy Rus or Russia has a much deeper history and roots in the collective consciousness of Russians and citizens of other countries bordering Russia. Therefore, it can more effectively steer public emotions and imagination. First, the Holy Rus ideology is shrouded in an aura of sacredness. It also refers to those historical periods portrayed in Russian Orthodox and secular literature as golden age of Russian history. The collective imagination is strongly associated with it, with episodes of struggle and victory over external enemies during the Moscow Tsardom, the Russian Empire, and in the history of USSR. It is a geopolitical category encompassing the entire Eurasian space, but its core is Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. The indivisibility of this core is the central good of the Holy Rus, in opinion of Patriarch Kirill, as the citizens of these states constitute one Russian people. The theme of wars plays an essential function within this ideology, whether it is the victory over the troops of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the 17th century, the Great Patriotic War against Napoleon in 1812, or the victory in Great Patriotic War against Nazism. And all this was symbolized by the Cathedral of the Armed Forces consecrated by Patriarch in 2020. As for the Moscow scribes of the 16th century, it emphasized the special place of Moscow Orthodoxy, or Russian Orthodoxy, and Russia from the eschatological perspective. Russia is seen as a pillar and foundation of the truth in the world, and therefore any attempt to defeat or impose alien values will end in the end of the world. Russia is united with God by a unique union or covenant. Therefore, any deviation from it in the past was not only a national tragedy, but a civilizational catastrophe. According to Russian Orthodox ideologists, Holy Rus is a system of moral guidelines that allows us to distinguish good from evil. Like the Slavophiles of the 19th century, they believe this idea's core is a dominance of the spiritual over the material, and it's very attractive for many Westerners, naive Westerners, sorry. The social teaching of the Catholic Church is very clear about such cases when those who take up arms claim to possess the totality of God's truth. And the Catholic Church strongly condemns such use of religion. And this is important when we talk about just peace for Ukraine. In his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis emphasizes that the art of peace building and healing begins with finding the truth. He writes that truth, in fact, is an inseparable companion of justice and mercy. Quoting the bishops of Congo, he notes that peace agreements on paper will not be enough. We will have to go further, respecting the demands of the truth about the origins of this recurring crisis. People have a right to know what happened, Pope writes. So I think these are very important words, also in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine. As Professor Philpott told in his speech, of course, ending the war and the withdrawal of troops from Ukrainian territories, paying all damages caused to Ukraine's reparations, and even apologizing about what they have done. So all these are very important things for just peace. But I think this is not enough. I think that it won't ensure just peace for Ukraine and the entire region. Only the condemnation of the ideology that is driving force behind this war can protect us from another relapse. Thank you.
Sorry for my absence at the last moment. I am very grateful to Anatoly for his passionate presentation. And finally, I would like to have a 20-minute discussion. I guess someone has to add or comment or ask. And I guess our question will be turned to our speakers here present or online. So I know that Yuri has a question, so please.
Okay, thank you. So my question is addressed to the Professor Philpott, and I would like to ask you, how would you correlate two basic principles of inviolability of borders and the right of self-determination?
Professor Philpott, are you here with us? I guess he is mutual, but I guess turn on his microphone, please. Okay. So maybe someone has another question to Professor Justenhofen. Maybe Oleg Turi want to ask something in German to Professor Justenhofen. He's here among us. Andrei Tretyak, yeah, please.
I have a question for Professor Justenhofen, as I'm curious about the discussion and some debate that are ongoing in German context, as you also mentioned, that the just war is not a concept really present nowadays in some this moral discussion of problem of war and peace, and that also there is well-known motto of German bishops that you can win a war with weapons, but never a peace. However, this theoretical approaches, this formulas, they don't work in what we see today in Ukraine. We see that we need weapons, and every nation needs weapons for a peace, to protect a peace or to establish a peace. As without a peace, we would have much more massacres, as we saw in Bucha and in Mariupol. So maybe are there some new discussions, new ways how to correlate this idea of pacifism that is intrinsically present in New Testament and generally is the core idea of Christianity, but there is of this reality of modern world that army and weapons are needed for peace also.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I think this is one of the key issues that we need to debate as Christians and especially as moral theologians. As I tried to say earlier, the basic idea is how to restore peace. Now, you were saying if we had peace, we wouldn't have to worry about war crimes. I think we need to distinguish and be very careful about the notions that we use. What we are talking about today is an armistice, so an end of fighting. And if the Russian army would stop fighting today, we wouldn't have peace. We would have an armistice. And the question of how to gain peace goes far beyond. Daniel Philpott already talked about the issue of reconciliation, which is a prerequisite for what we would call a political peace. And we distinguish political peace from the peace that only God can give. Now, why am I rejecting the term of a just war, or why I'm not using it? Because I think that we need to distinguish between the right to self-defense and an aggression. And if we use the term war for these two, we would have less. It would be less clear actually what we are talking about. The right to self-defense indicates that a country as Ukraine has witnessed an aggression. There is no question about it. It's morally legitimate from the point of international law and morally. And the idea of as I said, of the just war theory in history was different than our idea of the just peace, which goes beyond. Because in the Middle Ages, the idea was that the social order basically is given, is part of the creation. It is an idea of a cosmology where not only the cosmos, but also the social order is created by God. We today, as modern people of modern age, have a different idea that within what is called natural law, the laws of a nation, of a country, have been are part of a parliamentary process, of a democracy. And so the idea of what a good life is, how we create what Daniel called the common good, is a task that needs to be discussed and debated and created within a society. So the And the same is true for the international common good, for the global common good, for the peoples and the states. We have to create an international order where at least a minimum of law, of international law, is accepted, and rules are accepted by the heads of the states and by the people, by the different peoples. And that's why the creation of what we call a just peace basically is a political task. And the use of military force is strictly limited to self-defense. That is the big change in Christian ethics and in international law in the 20th century. And that's why I turn more to the term just peace, and knowing that the creation of the legitimate self-defense is part of our reality, as long as we don't have this functioning international order, which we don't have. And even if we have, we will need some sort of police and law enforcement, as we have within the states. And you were asking about the how to integrate the idea of tacitism. I think the idea of the Sermon on the Mount was exactly this: that we need to overcome violence, and we need to strictly limit it as far as possible. But it may happen that we need to use defense, the means necessary for collective defense of a people against an aggression. And I don't see that this is against what is said in the Sermon on the Mount. But it's, in the end, it serves to overcome violence.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. And we have a question from Yuri Martinyuk to Professor Philpott.
Dear Professor Philpott, my question is addressed to you. So, is it possible? How is possible to correlate two basic principles of right of self-determination and the principle of international law of inviolability of borders? And sorry in advance for my unpleasant illusionary hypothetical example. For example, one day the Spanish-speaking population of southern states decide to create new country based on common language, common culture, common history. How it will result in such way? How these two principles will work? Thank you.
Yes. Well, that's an excellent question. And I think self-determination is something morally very important, that a community of people has a right to its communal existence, its nationhood. And this community is what is at stake when an external force attacks it. So when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, in a way, it was the rights of this community, this nation, to be self-determining, to have its own existence, that was violated. And in fact, as Mr. Babinski and Dr. Fenna, others articulated, it is precisely the independent existence of this nation that is denied by the Ruski Mir ideology. I mean, Putin and Kirill do not even want to speak about Ukraine as a common community that exists or that has its own nationhood or its right to independence. And it was, in a sense, self-determination that Ukraine was exercising in December 1991, when it voted overwhelmingly to secede from the Soviet Union and choose to have its own independent statehood. And that is a right that ought to be respected. This people saw itself as an independent people. This nation is not a part of the Soviet Union. It has long been dominated and has a right to its independent existence. Now, what makes it difficult with self-determination is that a lot of times you have part of a state where you have a group of people who wants to secede. Like, for instance, we've had in Canada, the Quebec voted on whether to secede, in the 2000s, and it barely voted not to secede, to stay with Canada. South Sudan voted to secede in 2011, and the international community recognized such a right to secede. And some voices say in Russia are making an argument for Donetsk and Luhansk to have a kind of a right of self-determination. But I think the problem is that self-determination must always be qualified. If an entity is going to claim self-determination, it must show that it is going to govern itself according to the rule of law, according to respect for minorities. It must have a referendum where a majority, in fact, I would even argue a supermajority, because it is such a momentous decision, 60, 70%, not just 51%, ought to vote in its favor. And Luhansk and Donetsk have not had such a referendum. The referendums that were staged by Putin in September 2022 were shams. They were bogus. And polls show that majorities in these countries want to stay with Ukraine, that the sympathy for staying with Ukraine has only increased there since the invasion, as we see with the kind of condemnation of the war on the part of the Ukrainian churches, even members of the Moscow Patriarch. So you don't have the conditions for self-determination, and I see no need for a referendum to take place there. And they have every right to defend themselves as part of Ukraine. Ukraine has every right to defend them and to insist that Russia leave these territories. So this is not a bona fide, valid claim for self-determination. It is true that in international law, there is no right to secession or right to for a group to declare its independence. But if in certain cases, such as Ukraine in 1991 or South Sudan in 2011, if there is a referendum and if it is recognized by the surrounding international community, a state can become independent through such a referendum. So basically Ukraine is fighting for its self-determination. I don't think that Luhansk and Donetsk have any kind of right to secede or break off from Ukraine or join Russia. And I think the principle of self-determination largely sustains the principles that Ukraine is fighting for.
Could I add some ideas to what Dan Philpott just said? I would like to give you the hint to look into European history. And there you see two different movements. We had the 19th century of a very strong nationalism, where minorities had been suppressed and different languages except the national language were not allowed. And even cultural expressions were suppressed. And as a reason, we had unrest in Spain, like the Basques or the Catalans. We had the same in France. We have you look to the Irish Northern Ireland, you have these Poles. Even in my country, we have minorities, the Sorbs in the southeast and the Danish minority in the north. So all over Europe, you find that there are national minorities living in a larger state. And the question always has been, is it possible that different people of different languages and cultures can live together? And the number one example in Europe is Switzerland. Switzerland consists of basically 4 different language groups, and they all have their different cultural tradition. And as a result, the development in the 20th and 21st century in Europe is to give minority rights to groups that happen to live in a state that is basically when their language is not spoken. And you have that in Belgium. There's a German minority living in Belgium. There are minority rights increasingly in France, which is a classical nation state. You have minority rights for the Basque in Spain. There is a German-speaking group in Italy, in South Tyrolia, and so forth. If you look all over Europe, you will find that the language groups and the cultural traditions now are rising, and it's possible to live within a state and still adhere to your traditional language and your traditional culture, and in the end, it enriches. So I would argue that self-determination, autonomy, not necessarily needs to mean to have your own state, but can be within a state that has different language groups and different minorities. Thank you. We cannot hear you. Sorry, we cannot hear you.
My question is to Professor Justenhofen, and the question is about proportionality, how it can be applied into our case, because Russia and Ukraine aren't equal in military aspect. Yeah, so Russia can raise stakes up to the using of nuclear weapons. What means proportionality in Russian-Ukrainian war? Thank you.
I think in very general terms, it means that Ukraine can use the necessary means to achieve self-defense. So we had a debate last year where there was the question of whether Ukraine needs heavy weaponry from European nations. And I think it was obvious that as Russia used heavy weaponry, Ukraine needs to have heavy weaponry to be able to defend itself. The problem indeed is with nuclear weapons, and I think it's absolutely clear, and it has shown, the development of the last year has shown that nuclear weapons are of no use and may not be used on the as military means. They are political means, they are a last resort, but there is by no means they be used because the destruction that nuclear weapons cause are such that it's impossible to have any gain for anybody. And the reaction of China and India, for example, which made clear that there is no way that they would accept Russia to use nuclear weapons on the military field, on the battlefield. That's since then we have the Russian political leadership has been very reluctant to use the nuclear rhetoric again. May I just say one more word? I have the problem that I have to be at another conference in 15 minutes, so I will skip out in 5 minutes. Sorry for that.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And Dr. Lehturi has a question.
Thank you. I have a question for Irina Fenno and Anatoly Babinsky. Do you have some ideas about the using of both of our definition, peace, just peace and just war, in official rhetoric of Russian Orthodox Church now? Why I am asking this question? Because officially Russian doesn't lead war, only a special military operation. If they use the definition special peace making or something like that, you know, because I am confusing if they in total use this definitions now, just peace, just war. I would like just ask you if you heard something in this topics.
And before Irina will ask, I would like to thank to Professor Justenhofen, who is living in us. And thank you very much, Professor, for your kindness to participate in this round table, for your wisdom and being with us in this, I would say, very difficult but important time for our nation.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry that I have to skip out.
Bye. And Irina?
Yeah, may I unmute? Yeah, thank you for the question. And to say the truth, I would like to say just about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. I didn't make a real detailed analysis of all sermons and the speeches of Patriarch Kirill, so I will just make some my statement about the speeches and the sermons of the Metropolitan Onufry. I would say that for sure, you cannot find in his speeches the word just peace or even just war. In the most cases, he used the word war, armed confrontation, or fraternal war. And I think it's quite obvious why he used these words. But interesting that the word just peace very often was used by the Metropolitan Epiphany, and he just called to pray for the just peace, but also returning to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. To expect that at this phase of this situation of the war, and at this phase of the, I would say, conflict between the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the government or the state system, I wouldn't expect that the Metropolitan Onufry will use the word just peace. And also, I think the just war, it's also not very useful term in the context of Orthodox theology. So it's just my answer.
I agree with Irina that these terms are from Catholic vocabulary, just war and just peace, but this doesn't mean that Patriarch Kirill doesn't think in such terms, because we know that during his conversation with Pope Francis, he tried to justify the war. But yes, I agree with Irina that he never uses such phrases. His most used phrase is fratricidal conflict, bratulbistvenny conflict. He likes this very much, fratricidal conflict, and but I never heard about just peace.
Okay. Thank you, Anatoly and Irina, for your answers. Our time is almost over, but we honor it of the presence of our senior vice rector, Taras Dobko, from the very beginning. He was with us, and I would like him to ask to summarize our event today. So floor is yours, Taras.
Thank you, Father Yuri. And first of all, we owe words of thanks to all speakers and to respondents. I took many notes, and I will not go through them, don't be afraid, so to spare our time. But secondly, I what I wanted to say at the conclusion is maybe to share a few thoughts from kind of very recent trip of myself and of 3 other people to Eastern Ukraine. So we visited Kharkiv, we visited Dnipro and Zaporizhia. And these remarks have some, I think, some relation to our topic today. You know, first of all, you know, at some point last year in the war, we thought that maybe, you know, the war will be a sprint, but we see now it's a marathon. But honestly speaking, it's both, because, you know, people are taking so lot effort to live, not only to fight, and to live with dignity, to live in a resilient way. And I think one of important lessons, you know, from this trip is the need for moral solidarity. You know, Russia is it was already mentioned, is bigger. You know, it's bigger also in material resources. And, you know, thanks to the West, we get, you know, military equipment, we get humanitarian aid, and people who are affected by war are very thankful for this. But they also look for moral solidarity. And I think this is kind of very important to go through these through this trial. Another observation is that probably one way to talk to a victim of aggression about such unsettling things, matters as reconciliation and forgiveness, is to use apophatic approach, as theologians would say. I mean, to start with articulating what forgiveness is not, what we don't expect from people when we talk about forgiveness, or what reconciliation, true reconciliation, is not. Because, you know, there are so many fakes and there are so many substitutes for genuine forgiveness and reconciliation. And talking in this way, I think, also will be a sign of this moral sensitivity and certain awareness of the complexity of the topic. I think what people need is to show that we have this sensitivity while talking about complex matters. Another observation is that, in a sense, people are concerned, so that they believe, so there is an optimistic mood, and they believe about the victory of Ukraine on the military field. But where is their concern is, as we say, you know, victory after the victory. If it, and that relates really to the question on common good. So what is, you know, the reason we are, or the cause we are defending, we are fighting for, and this really, this common good of Ukrainian people, whatever it means. And people are very concerned that we live up to the standards in post-war Ukraine that we defended during, or still are defending during the war. And the last point, it also relates to what Anatoly was saying. What are preconditions for just peace, not only for Ukraine, but for the region and for Europe? I think ultimately it's Ukraine's membership in NATO as soon as possible, not only kind of for the defense, the reasons of defense, but also it would be a powerful manifestation for Russian imperialists to give up on their imperial ambition. Because it's not only about condemnation, it must be, of course, because, Anatoly was right that, crime with impunity and unpunished crime kind of necessitates or encourages another crime. But to unlearn, how to be an imperial, nation and what it means, they have to receive some kind of powerful sign or powerful step, which is really that Ukraine becomes a member in NATO. That would lead to that would really force Russians to give up on the idea that Ukraine is part of the empire. So thank you, everybody. And I think this is the beginning of the project. And I hope that all these discussions and conversations and ideas will evolve into some articles and also into further discussions or even policies, perhaps, and further discussions that will be relevant for Ukraine, Europe, and the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Taras. Thank you very much for this nice summarizing of our event. Let me express one more time deep gratitude for all our honored speakers today, for your time, for your solidarity with Ukraine, for all participants here present and been with us online. And to close this roundtable, let us raise our prayers for all our brave soldiers, men and women, who sacrificing their lives for the sake of just peace in Ukraine. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. One more time, thank you to all of you. Have a nice day in the United States, and have a peaceful evening for all of you who are in Ukraine. Who are joining today for this small but very important roundtable.
Well, thank you all for very much. Yuri, Father Yuri, I hope you feel that things went well and to your expectations.
Yeah, it's about my expectations. I know that you have a lot of different things around you're involved in, and our colleagues also have, and I'm grateful for those who found in their tight schedules time to come and to listen, to discuss, and to learn something, I guess. So once more, thank you very much. And let's keep in touch.
Well, thank you for putting together such a great event. And Dr. Finno, great honor to be with you, and with the other great, what was an incredible lineup that you put together. Great honor to be with all of these people. So,
thank you, Professor, and thank to all of you.
Okay, well, we'll be in touch on the next steps.
Yeah. I'll
Okay.
call you next week because we have a great length going to the end. So I have a couple of retreats. So I'll call you.
Okay.
At the beginning of maybe next week, or I will write you before that you could arrange, or your schedule I will adjust.
Yes. Well, I know that I know if a Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, if your Easter is on the same day, but we're about to celebrate Holy Week.
Easter with other Eastern churches, but someone told us in the future we are going to have together.
Yes, I saw that. Yes, good. Okay,
So have a nice day, Professor.
okay, all right. Yeah, God
Again, I
bless
want to
you.
thank
Thank you,
you
everybody. Okay,
And for all others. Bye.
okay, great, bye.